have done so. Now, the Education Secretary, Michael Gove, has been accused of many things, but reticence or even modesty isn't one of them. He's got more plans for reforming schooling than the European Union has directives. Today he started off by thanking schools for coping with the demands he's made of them, but he couldn't stop himself making more demands. His ambition, he said, was to create an environment in which you can't tell whether a school's in the private or the state sector. Here's Emily's essay.
Back in the 1990s, our Secretary of State for Education was part of a top club.
And Michael Gove.
Then, as today, he knew how important extracurricular activities could be, helping, as he would put it, to build character and instill grit.
His main hobbies are real ale and real women.
Back then, he was good at the politics.
Well done. Who succeeded Gerald Ford as president? For you, Michael.
Jimmy Carter.
It was Jimmy Carter.
A gift his critics say never left him. They point to his dismissal, announced this weekend, of the Ofsted head Sally Morgan as a case in point.
I'm really worried that what we're seeing is a politicisation of such an important body such as Ofsted, really, when it has so much to do on school standards, on school improvement, on collaboration, and what we're seeing is the Secretary of State playing politics with this really important post.
What do you say to that, Michael?
False.
So how much is it about politicisation of the role, as claimed by the Lib Dems and Labour, and how much is it part of a wider Gove vision, a man who has such a clear idea of what he's determined education should be about, that he doesn't want anyone, least of all anyone at Ofsted, to get in his way?
When they have an interest in what they affirm.
When they have an interest in what they affirm, that's very, very good.
Holland Park School, name-checked by Mr Gove in his speech this morning, exemplifies the ambition and ethos of excellence he wants to see everywhere. It's a state school that's changed dramatically in the last 10 years, from the pretty parlour state Ofsted found it in 2003 to the outstanding rating it was granted last time around in 2011. I asked the head, Colin Hall, if he worries about politicisation of Ofsted.
I think inevitably one worries about that, and I think it would be regrettable if the political landscape and the educational landscape were so fused that they had become inseparable. It's not been my experience in any Ofsted inspection that I felt any degree at all of politicisation. I think one, certainly in 2011, felt a particular brand that one hadn't felt in previous inspections.
Mr Gove is ambitious. He believes the success story of places like Holland Park can be repeated throughout the state sector. And today sounded the death knell on that well-worn phrase of the Blair administration, the bog standard school.
The facts now show beyond any reasonable doubt that English state education is starting to show a sustained and significant improvement.
The Gove vision isn't just sweetness and light. Today's speech also told teachers to punish where they see fit. He even told them how to do it.
Schools can insist on attention, whether at lunch break, after school or at weekends. And they do not need, as they used to under Labour, to give parents notice. They can ask students to do extra work, or to repeat unsatisfactory work, to write lines or an extra essay.
Mr Gove has seen himself as locked in a struggle with this little fella, the blob, the amoebic slime emblematic of the quangos and institutions that are meant to stand in the way of radical change.
But if the Secretary of State has a strong feeling, a passion about the direction that Ofsted should be going in, shouldn't he be allowed to exercise that?
Yes, Secretary of State should have autonomy and power. But what we're facing at the moment, Emily, is a situation where everyone's saying Sally Morgan is doing a good job. We are seeing Ofsted inspecting in a new and creative manner in certain circumstances. She is working well with Michael Wilshaw, and yet the Secretary of State's getting rid of her for essentially party political purposes.
Now, I understand a lot of this hinges on the relationship between the Chief Inspector of Schools, Sir Michael Wilshaw, and Michael Gove himself. Sir Michael was brought in as a man who shared Mr Gove's passions and understanding of the need for reform at Ofsted, and yet some say he struggled to bring the institution with him.
2 weeks ago, Michael Wilshaw saw red, angered by reports that plans were being drawn up to reform, even replace Ofsted. And last year, David Cameron appointed to the Cabinet Office a former Conservative campaigns officer, a move Labour fear will fill the top jobs with more Tories. Michael Gove insists this isn't part of a bigger Number 10 plan, that the Morgan move was, shall we say, all his own work. The Education Secretary is a man who's known for his zeal and a sense of doing things his way, as the Top Club might once have sung.
It's got to be perfect.
2 points here, yeah.
Well, we did ask Michael Gove, or indeed any of his backing group of education ministers, to come on to Newsnight to discuss his speech, but they said no one was available. I am joined, though, by Robert Wilne, head teacher of the London Academy of Excellence. Are you headmaster or head teacher?
I usually call myself headmaster, but whatever.
Headmaster, there we are, headmaster of the London Academy, the free school where Michael Gove made his speech. Fiona Miller, who chairs the Local Schools Network, which campaigns to promote local state schools, and David Green, who runs the Civitas think tank. He's right, isn't he, in a way, in saying that the bog standard school is leaving England?
I think so. Personally, I think that the creation of numerous academies and a fairly large number of free schools has made a big difference. It depends on whether you think competition drives up standards or whether you think it doesn't, and personally I think it does. The great problem we've had in the last 30 years is that we've had 25 or 30% of pupils, usually from disadvantaged backgrounds, going to schools where they just have not achieved their potential, and that couldn't be solved under the state system with local authorities in the driving seat, if not directly controlling schools in quite the way they used to. And his introduction of free schools and academies has, I think, transformed the situation, and to that extent it's a reasonable inference.
Fiona Miller, what do you make of the fact that he seemed to take the independent sector as the benchmark, the desirable benchmark?
Well, he always does that. I mean, I thought his speech today was a little bit bonkers, if you don't mind me saying so. I mean, to talk about state schools introducing lines, bringing in common entrance tests, but more importantly...
Well, there's no reason why they couldn't if they wanted to.
Well, why would they want to? But he talked a lot about things that state schools are already doing as if they weren't doing it, which is part of the course with Michael Gove, because he likes to set up these sort of straw men, doesn't he? The sort of trendy, progressive state schools not doing rigour, not doing Duke of Edinburgh's, not doing debating. In fact, all these things are going on in state schools all the time, and parents know that full well.
It's a false dichotomy. He talks about state schools and independent schools, when really he should be talking about good schools and schools that are not yet good. And it's the responsibility of the good schools to make the not yet good schools good. And the state of independent is irrelevant. Yeah. It's about knowledge and experience in schools being shared with the schools where that's not yet fully embedded. And that's what is happening in London. That's what London Challenge achieved. And that's why London schools are so successful nowadays.
Because they've had a lot more money.
And they've had a lot more focus, a lot more attention. And what needs to happen now is the same...
Did you think the speech wasn't bonkers?
As I said afterwards, because it was my school where he gave it, I said afterwards, like a very good lesson, Michael, you gave us some things we've heard before, some things we haven't heard, and lots of things to go away and think about. There are some aspects in it. Having come from the independent sector, I think the school where I used to work, Highgate School, I think one of the most sensible things it did was get rid of the common entrance. I think
it's very interesting, because he was, when there used to be a test at 14, didn't there, which was done away with because it all turned into a complete shambles. Mm-hmm. And I seem to recall that he was actually rather in favour of getting rid of it.
Well, I can't remember. I think it was Ed Balls who got rid of it. I think the point about Michael Gove is the language he uses and the way he speaks is increasingly detached from what actually goes on in real schools. And I think he's alienating a lot of heads and teachers who are working very hard to do all the things you talk about by demonising them, presenting them as this sort of mythical blob which doesn't really exist apart from in the minds of the Daily Telegraph.
We'll come to the blob in a minute or two. But what about some of these other proposals that there be lines, for example, given and other forms of punishment in schools?
I think the way to look at this is like this, that the big structural changes have happened. There's now these free schools and academies, and the next stage is to go on to, which I think is partly what you were saying, Robert, is what makes for a good school? What should schools be doing? And so what he is saying is, there's been this problem of discipline in recent years, and he's saying, let me make it clear that there is more you can do. I didn't think it was in the least bit bonkers. And he was saying that, for example, he will know perfectly well that if you look at the international study, the PISA study, it tries to work out what makes the difference between an independently managed school, why they do better than the state schools. And one of the things is they just put in more time. So he's saying,
let me make it clear you can put in more time.
All right, let's talk to the point that Fiona raised a minute ago, and he refers to the blob. Just explain what the blob is.
Well, I don't know what the blob is. I mean, it's a creation.
Does anybody know what the blob is?
And the Daily Telegraph
it means
leader writers, I think.
It's just a way of referring to the inertia in a system. And so for the last 30-odd years, there's been this tremendous focus on what has sometimes been called progressive, sometimes child-centred, sometimes child-led education, and it has dragged down standards.
Do you think Fiona's part of the blob?
Yes, she is.
I'm a journalist. There's a lot of blobby journalists, that is for sure.
You're a chairman of governors, and you're also an activist in the local schools network.
Anyone who criticises child-centred education is making a rather big mistake, because education should be centred on the children.
No, it's child-led, isn't it? That's the point. Child-led or teacher-led. The really important thing is this.
But there's another false dichotomy.
Look, one of the things that we've encountered is often inspectors going around giving a school outstanding for achievement and then giving them good for teaching quality because they were too didactic, because
but that's a separate issue. We're talking about the way Michael Gove deals with people who work in the front line, the professionals in education.
That's what the blob is. It's because the inspectors are enforcing doctrines that do not work for children from disadvantaged backgrounds.
There are teachers and there are head teachers. These are the people that run our schools and make them work well. We want to encourage them to do better if they're not doing well enough and celebrate the ones that are doing well. The way Michael Gove approaches this is to demonise everybody who works in the state system and say that everybody in the private system is doing absolutely brilliantly. And we need to switch the rhetoric and focus more on support and collaboration and all the things you've talked about.
Do you feel you're part of the blob?
No, I don't.
You know what the blob is, though, don't you?
Oh, it's some construct put together by the media, isn't it, really? I mean, in the same way...
You don't recognise that there is an orthodoxy in academic circles about what teaching ought to be, what its style ought to be, what its methodology ought to be.
No, I don't think that's true. I mean, I think that might have been true 10 years ago, but I don't think that's true now.
But also the other...
I mean, it's just talking about Ofsted. Yeah. I mean, only last week, Michael Wilshaw had published an open letter to the inspectors saying, stop saying that the lesson was bad because there was too much teacher talk, or the lesson was bad because there wasn't enough independent...
Why did he need to do that? He needed to do that because it was a problem.
But the point being that the chief inspector is saying it's the most important thing about a lesson, which seems fairly obvious, is whether the children learn something or not, whether the children make progress. And the method, and sometimes that'll be through teacher talk, and sometimes that'll be through independent learning, and sometimes it'll be through group work, and sometimes it'll be through some other method. But what matters at the end of each lesson is, do the children walk out of the room knowing more than when they walked into the room?
Can I just say, the other sort of part of the madness of Michael Gove is he talks the language of autonomy and wants everybody to be free, and then he does nothing but tell people how to do their job. So now he's telling them how to discipline their children, he's telling them how to teach them.
You really think there's no problem?
With teaching, yes, I've said, of course many schools do need to get better, I fully accept that. But the question is...
As our elected representative, isn't his job to try to make things better?
I'm making the point that he says he wants to give power to heads and to teachers to decide how they run their schools. Well, let's let them do it. They don't need to be lectured by him about how to instill discipline in their pupils or how exactly to teach a lesson. If he wants autonomy, let's do that.
I think David's point is absolutely crucial.
You'll be backed centrally, isn't he? That's what he's doing.
David's point is very crucial.
He wants to control it all centrally.
He doesn't want to. No, he's making it clear that from Whitehall there will be backing for teachers who use these methods.
What are we trying to do? And some of the things that have been talked about today in the speech sound like education hasn't developed a new purpose apart from preparing people to go and work in clerical jobs which no longer exist. I mean, the good schools, the best schools now, are teaching, as well as knowledge, the skills of creativity, of independent thinking. I mean, Piaget says that people who are intelligent know what to do when they don't know what to do, and that surely is what schools should be doing, and that's exactly what people like Guy Claxton and Dylan Williams are talking about all the time. And if that, we seem to be have come back to these conversations again and again about methods of teaching, and we don't talk about what the purpose
well, those are the discredited doctrines, aren't they? Piaget, for example, is the discredited child.
I think this is getting slightly recondite here. Thank you very much indeed.